Welcome to Prayer and Bible Band Lesson 6. I do not own the rights to this music. Today's topic is staying focused during storms. The background reading is coming out of Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 9, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 27, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 25, Isaiah chapter 4, verse 6, Matthew chapter 8, verse 24, Luke chapter 8, verse 23, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17. The devotional reading is coming out of Acts chapter 27, verses 9 through 44. Our central verse is Psalms 107, verse 29. I will read the King James Version first and then the New Living Translation. He caused the storm to be still, so that the waves of the sea were hushed. The New Living Translation. He calmed the storm to a whisper and stilled the waves. The key terms for today's lesson: shipwreck, Euroclydon. Shipwreck, to destroy a ship by driving ashore or sinking a wrecked ship or its parts. Euroclydon, a strong, cold northeast wind of the central Mediterranean. The introduction says, Wikipedia says that storms are the disturbed state of the natural environment or the atmosphere of an astronomical body. It may be marked by significant destruction to normal conditions such as tornadoes, hail, thunder, and lightning, heavy precipitation, snowstorm, rainstorm, heavy freezing rain, ice storm, strong winds, tropical cyclone, windstorm, wind transporting some substance through the atmosphere, such as a dust storm. These different storms all have the potential to harm human lives, cause millions of dollars worth of damage to communities, and disturb the natural habitat of many species of animals, fish, and birds. Violent storms create havoc and cause much fear. They create problems in the spiritual as well as the natural. The Bible speaks of several storms that God's people had to encounter and deal with. People may not know exactly when the storm will come, but they know it certainly will come, so they must prepare for it. The discussion says, people must stay focused during storms to do what is necessary and work out survival plans. Usually in the United States, it is known that some regions are prone to certain types of storms at certain times of the year. Most of the time, the weather storm centers send out warnings, which allow time to prepare for the storm or to evacuate. Some people don't want to evacuate. They want to ride out the storm. The people who ride out the storms must prepare for the worst. Sometimes the storms become worse than they ever dreamed, and someone must come and rescue them. It can be risky for these people because sometimes no one can get to them. That is when they must rely entirely upon God to protect and shield them. In spiritual storms, the believer must be able to put his trust in a God who never fails, a God who knows how to speak to the wind and the rain, and they obey his voice. The disciples were out in the boat with Jesus. Jesus must have been tired because he found himself a place to rest in the lower part of the ship and had gone to sleep. A storm rose and the wind and the waves became very fierce. It was so bad that the disciples thought the ship was going to cause them to drown. They became overly concerned and decided to wake Jesus up. They wondered how he could sleep during this violent storm. They asked him if he knew that the wind and the waves were violent and perhaps the ship would wreck. They asked him whether he cared if they perished and why was he asleep. Jesus, who understood that he had power over storms, replied to them, "O ye of little faith." He then spoke to the wind and the waves and told them, "Peace, be still." And immediately the wind and the waves obeyed him. Jesus pointed out that the disciples must have a working faith to survive storms of life. A believer may encounter several storms as he lives his life, and he must be prepared to stay focused. Sometimes he will have to ride out a storm, like Paul did in Acts chapter 27. He had to go through the storm Euroclydon, a hurricane force wind that blows across the Mediterranean Sea from the northeast to the southwest during the fall and winter months. Paul was under arrest and his accusers were determined to take him to Rome, Italy, although the weather was not at its best for sailing. The winds were contrary, but they sailed anyway. When they arrived at Fair Haven, the sailing was dangerous because the weather was terrible. Paul told them that if they continued to sail, it would be hazardous and many lives would be in danger, as well as the ship. But they disregarded what Paul had to say, and they believed the master of the ship more than Paul. To stay focused, the believer must not stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful, but his delight must be in what God says through his servants. The believer must know what the Spirit is saying to the church. When the shipmaster saw a gentle wind blowing, they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before long, a wind of hurricane force, called Euroclydon, a northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught in the storm and could not head into the wind. So they drifted along. The wind was so strong that they could not secure the lifeboat, so the men threw it overboard. The wind and the waves were so strong that they put ropes under the ship, trying to hold it together. After fearing that they could run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship drift along. After the storm battered them, they began throwing the cargo overboard the next day. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. The storm raged so severely for many days that neither the sun nor the stars appeared. It was so bad that the men began feeling hopeless, thinking they would all perish. They had no food and no hope of being saved. Once again, Paul encouraged them to keep up their courage. He told them they should have taken his advice, not sailed from Crete, and could have spared themselves this damage. He also told them that if they kept up their courage, not one would perish, and only the ship would be lost. On the 14th night, they were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. Their surroundings were not good, but the soldiers let the lifeboat down into the sea. Paul told them unless they stayed on the ship, they could not be saved. Therefore, they cut away the ropes that held the lifeboats and they drifted away. Paul stayed in contact with God. He reminded the men that they had fasted and not eaten, but he encouraged them to eat for their health's sake and to get ready, because if they obeyed him, no man would be lost. In conclusion, Paul took bread and blessed it, and he and the men ate bread and meat. The next day they ran the ship aground. The ship got stuck and could not move, and the back of the ship began to break up because of the violent waves. Those who could swim got into the sea and swam to the land, others on broken pieces of the ship, but all of them made it to the land safely. Believers must always abide in Jesus and allow him to abide in them. The believer must allow his faith to work and stay focused during a storm. He must know, trust, and allow God to strengthen him during the storm. When a believer trusts Jesus, the believer can go through anything and remain focused. Trust in the Lord and do good, but do not trust your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge God, and He will direct your path. The questions for today's lesson. Number 1, what can a believer do when he finds himself in a storm? Number 2, what did Jesus do when the disciples woke him up? And number 3, why did he say to them, O ye of little faith? The essential thought: if you abide in Jesus, then He will abide in you. The end. God bless you and thank you for joining me today.